Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It's an iconic image of Elon Musk's time as a government slasher.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
The world's richest person tasked by the world's most powerful person to take a chainsaw to federal spending, now brandishing a literal chainsaw on stage. Measured against its stated goal, Musk's Department of Government Efficiency was an abject failure. His time helming DOGE is now over, his relationship with the American president erupting in public acrimony. But Musk's chainsaw-wielding crusade is now embedded in the federal government's DNA, with the potential to influence American governance for decades to come. I'm Caryn Ceolin, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking to Jacob Silverman, author and host of the CBC podcast, The Making of Musk, Understood, to discuss the fallout post-DOGE and Musk's lasting influence on the U.S. government. Jacob, thanks so much for making the time today. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
It really wasn't that long ago where you couldn't go really a day without seeing Elon Musk's name in the headlines. But, since he's backed away from Washington, it kind of occurred to me as I was preparing to speak with you today that I don't really know what Musk is up to these days. Can you shed some light for us?
Sure. Well, he's certainly got some concerns closer to home, and I mean that both metaphorically and literally. He's always got his many children, at least 14 that we know of, by several different mothers, and a kind of compound he's built for them, or at least for some of them, in Austin, Texas. And he's spoken of trying to expand his family, or his legion of children, as he calls it, seemingly indefinitely. He also has some issues with Tesla, which he is trying to kind of keep under closer management because they have offered him a $1 trillion pay package that, he's very unlikely to reach, but is, of course, supposed to be a motivator. Tesla has some issues with Chinese competition, with the decline of Musk's reputation over the last year because of a lot of his political activity and his posting activity. I think it's still worth keeping in mind that he is posting a lot about political issues, and he's also sometimes speaking remotely to political events like to the AfD party in Germany or to right-wing political parties in Italy and elsewhere. So he's got a lot going on, as always, in his business world. And he has made up perhaps a little bit with Trump, at least on the surface level, at the Charlie Kirk funeral. A lot of people saw them shaking hands there.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about his time in politics, at least in Washington, because one of the most contentious and possibly transformative initiatives during the second Trump administration has been the creation of DOGE in coordination with Musk. Now that he's left, though, what is left of DOGE? Do we know?
I think it's worth keeping in mind that, or worth understanding that a lot of DOGE is still there. This was back in June of this year, but still not that long ago. Joe Lonsdale, who is a wealthy venture capitalist, who's very much part of the greater PayPal mafia circle, as we might call them, Musk's larger circle. He said that many of our friends from DOGE are still in place. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but this is what he said on CNBC. A lot of the people who were hired, including those young engineers we've heard a bit about who are 19, 20, 21, they are still going through government agencies and frankly, probably taking data to who knows where. There was already a scandal over a copy made of all the country's social security information and possibly on an insecure server. So I think we're still dealing with kind of the work that they want to do. And also, of course, a lot of folks have probably heard stories about people being called back to work. But that doesn't mean that that some of these agencies have had to say, oh, we were going to cut so many people. And then the Republican leadership gets in there and they realize, actually, you need some of these people to run this agency. But I wouldn't take that to assume that everything has been rolled back. A lot of both the damage done by DOGE and the personnel loss is still there. And now we have a government shutdown. So this larger goal, I think, of hollowing out the government and of making it more dependent on private services and especially on AI and automation, which is what they want to do. I think that larger project is still in motion and is happening. It's just very messy.
Yeah, at the time of this recording, we are a week into a U.S. government shutdown that's really given the Trump administration some sway to slash the federal government, really in the same way as DOGE. Is this simply picking up where Musk left off, or do you think this is, perhaps more indicative of maybe his lasting influence on the U.S. government?
I think in some ways both. I mean, I think Musk intentionally chose a lane that was, he had his own version of it with DOGE and hollowing out the government and doing a lot of AI and automation. But that really melded well with long-standing Republican policy where they don't like the federal bureaucracy. They see a lot of it as useless and not as middle-class workers who keep things running and perhaps keep us safe in some instances. So Musk sort of offered a more technophile interpretation of kind of long-standing government right-wing wish lists, which was to fire a lot of people from the government and to get rid of entire government agencies if possible. So I think we'll see this kind of behavior, this kind of policy continue forward, but again, in this very haphazard way, which is probably even more destructive in the short and long term because it's not really being done with much reason behind it.
I wonder, because when you look at DOGE's stated goal of cutting $2 trillion in waste that, Musk vowed to find, it hasn't necessarily come close to cutting that. Do you think that's left Musk almost licking his wounds?
Yeah, I think also they misunderstood how you might cut money from the government budget. I mean, there are a couple of ways to do it. One is the way the Democrats have advocated, which is that you more broadly, you raise taxes on the rich or have a wealth tax and you try to generate more revenue so that the amount of debt and the amount of payment that the government is responsible for goes down, relatively speaking. But they never really could have cut the government in a meaningful way via DOGE unless they fulfilled this dictatorship idea that seemingly a lot of them have, but there's still an appropriations process via Congress, and they still decide how money is spent, of course, with a lot of influence from the executive, from the president. But you can't just go in there really, even in our kind of rattled democracy, and say, this is gone, this is done, this is done. It's just not really how the money is decided to be spent. It's not how it is spent in practice. So I think they showed in a way what is possible or what some people might desire, or that you could get a lot done without asking permission. And that's what they did. But ultimately, if you want to cut huge pieces of the government and fundamentally change how the government works, which certainly people in MAGA and the Republican Party do want, you're going to have to do a lot of that through Congress and through some of the more formal mechanisms, at least for now.
And yet, given that context, the agency still claims that it saved upwards of $200 billion across the whole of the federal government. Do we know how inflated that savings claim is?
I think it's hard to take seriously. I mean, they do post some of these programs that they're cutting, and they brag about it a little bit on X and elsewhere. There may be, in some sense, there may be savings in the sense that money that was appropriated through Congress will no longer be spent on certain programs. But there is also, as we've talked about, the disruption from people being fired or let go who need to be brought back. I mean, that might count as savings to them. Or these other programs that, might have been taken off the books momentarily, but are not necessarily gone in any meaningful way. So I guess the short of it is that it's a very specious idea of savings. It's like someone going through your list of expenses and just cutting off whatever they wanted without really asking, do you need this or do you need that?
And so if I'm interpreting that correctly, there really is no real way to gauge exactly how much DOGE, particularly in the Musk era, has actually saved.
Yes, I would say just like with Trump's crypto fortune, you're going to hear a lot of different numbers, and they will have some numbers that they claim are accurate, but there's many times, even already this year, that the DOGE folks have revised their estimates, both down and up, of how much they've saved. So, I don't trust those numbers, and I don't think they are really an accurate way to assess what they're doing, whether positive or negative.
I guess to contrast like when we think of DOGE against its, stated goal of saving trillions of dollars, it would be an abject failure. But Musk almost left the position, well positioned to land some massive defense contracts under Trump. DOGE was certainly successful, as you alluded to earlier, in creating these kind of high levels of chaos, demoralizing the federal workforce. I wonder, given those two aspects, do you think this was a total failure for Musk or wildly successful?
I actually think in a lot of ways he was successful. Yes, he came to blows with Trump, so to speak, but they did resolve things to some extent. And Musk hasn't suffered a lot of consequences in terms of the government. I think it's really important to mention, as you did, that he is a major defense contractor and perhaps still the most important defense contractor for the U.S. government, certainly the most important rocket launch partner for the Defense Department for getting satellites into space. And just recently, he's not involved in this Stargate program that he wants to be, this big data center and AI project. He has gotten multiple contracts for Grok, or XAI, his AI company, in the government just in recent months, including one in which he undercut the pricing of a number of the other major tech and AI companies and was offering, I believe the number was 42 cents per user. So, I think the one area where Musk has made a mistake is public opinion. There are a lot of people who don't like him anymore, who might have before or who would have bought his cars before. And that is going to make a meaningful difference in Europe and elsewhere. A lot of European politicians have already accused him of meddling in their elections, especially in Germany a few months ago. So I do think in the American context, it seems like in a way he was wildly successful. He got a lot for his money. It was messy, and he and Trump didn't always get along, but he got a lot for it and has a chance to leverage it more for the future if he doesn't have another blow up with Trump. But this is also someone who works globally and I think faces a lot of threats outside the U.S.
Is this why an unelected billionaire then inserts himself in sort of political matters in which he has no real expertise?
Yeah, because for one thing, he feels like he can, and very few people say no to someone like this. But also, as others have said, Musk is probably the most powerful private citizen in the world. And we're seeing how that plays out and how that works if he chooses to get involved wherever he likes.
How do you think history will judge Musk's really brief foray into government, and given the low public sentiment around it, do you think he'll make a return?
I think it's certainly possible he can make a return. I think he kind of lacks the focus, it seems, to do something like the America Party, his proposed third party. He's simply got too much going on, I think. And while he is very interested in politics and has some strong political opinions or grievances, I don't think he's as sort of a dyed-in-the-wool political animal as someone like Peter Thiel or even David Sachs, who are in the administration now. So I could see him certainly getting back into it as a donor and perhaps on a more ad hoc basis. But I think ultimately he'll be seen like a lot of very wealthy billionaires who got involved in American politics or perhaps elsewhere, which is that he tried to use his power and his money to get his way. And at times he was successful and at times not. And I think it's pretty easy to say even now from our vantage that it wasn't in the public interest.
You map out the beginnings of Musk's story in your new 4-part series with CBC. I wonder, Musk's insatiable drive for dominance, which you explore to great lengths, how does that fit into this context? And I suppose his drive to have a seat at the most powerful table in the world.
Sure. One thing we talk about in our series is that this is something even Musk has said in the past to people around him, is that basically if he joins an organization, he needs to be in charge of it. And you certainly saw that earlier in his career when, he didn't found Tesla, for example. He joined it as an investor and then progressively gained more control over it until eventually he was running it. And we saw a bit of that in the last political campaign, which is that while he did not necessarily run the Trump campaign, he did pretty much do that in Pennsylvania, from most people's understanding. And he also integrated himself into the political campaign more than we've really seen from any other outside party or donor. So there, I think, were some forces that kind of stopped that, put a stop to that. And Trump himself being this huge personality and this unifying force for the MAGA movement. Perhaps if there were a weaker Republican candidate, Musk would have stayed in the scene longer. But we already saw Musk again assert this role that has never really been done before. And then what really shocked me, I think, and now seems almost normal in retrospect, but at the time was when Musk started appearing on phone calls at Mar-a-Lago after the election or in meetings with Trump with these world leaders. I think that was a sign for me that something different was happening here, something that we hadn't seen before.
Tell me a little bit about your investigation into Elon Musk and I suppose some of the other things that surprised you in doing this.
Well, we looked a lot at his family and at the South Africa history. I mean, things that have been looked at before, but I think are kind of underserved sometimes in the story of Musk and how he became the type of person he is. So one interesting thing from South Africa was, I mean, one of his contemporaries, a friend of his really in high school, said he wasn't that impressive in a lot of ways. He was just one of the guys. He was kind of nerdy. He could code a little bit. He liked video games like the rest of them. But there was not an obvious sense that this man was destined for big things. He did talk about himself as if, even when they played games, when they played role-playing games, he called himself Elon the Great. But he did really seem, okay, this guy's going to get out of our apartheid country. He didn't even seem that aware of what was going on politically and do big things. So I thought that was interesting that there is a self-propelled quality, and I think something that he had to will himself into doing. And part of that involved also getting out of apartheid South Africa. So I thought that was very interesting. And he has had, as one of his early bosses said, this reality distortion field that he can construct around himself. And that I think now from a distance, a lot of us can judge him in various ways. And he certainly has a long track record to judge. But earlier in his career, even when he hadn't accomplished very much, he was quite a salesman and very good at kind of talking people into seeing his view, even when it seemed to run against what was logical.
Based on what you learned about his past and his past, what might that reveal, do you think, about what comes next for Musk?
I think he is someone who still has that same drive to be the dominant force in any room he's in. We talk about actually about this culture called boss cop in South Africa, where it's sort of the white man in the room is the boss. And we talk a lot about the kind of the ideological and political and social culture that this guy grew up in, where white people and white male elites like him were really in charge. And I think that is at least an attitude or a mindset that he's carried over into a lot of his dealings. And this is not someone who likes to be slowed down in any regard, and doesn't really accept moderation or critique even from the people around him. So when Musk sort of seems to modulate for a moment or delete some tweets about Trump and Epstein, I think that's just a temporary tapping of the brakes before we see him come roaring out again and doing things that are pretty reckless, pretty bold, and very much affecting all of us in one way or another.
Yeah, in that vein, how might you characterize his really outsized influence, not just on American governance, but really American society as a whole?
I think he's changed what we thought was possible in politics in this age of unlimited political spending. I mean, we've already had people who have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on behalf of candidates for both Republicans and Democrats, but this way of getting involved and this way of representing this new tech billionaire class that people are increasingly concerned about. It used to be not that long ago that a lot of tech millionaires and billionaires, while they weren't universally liked, they had a little bit more of a nerd celebrity aspect to them. They weren't considered oligarchs. That wasn't language that was tossed around a lot. And now they are. And it's not just people like Elon Musk. Of course, it's the head of a lot of the big tech companies. Lately, it's Larry Ellison, the head of Oracle, who seems to be profiting tremendously thanks to his relationship with Trump and the role he's going to play soon in TikTok. So I think Musk is really at the forefront of that not only is this man so rich and so powerful, but he's clearly very erratic and changes his mind a lot, does a lot of things that disturb people, cannot be relied upon as sort of a stable political actor. And that is troubling to people. And I think that's what people are going to take away also from this last kind of political cycle, especially as we head into 2026 and 2028. What is this guy who's not just trying to put his thumb on the scales, but doing it very dramatically, willing to test the bounds of the law? What is he going to do?
Is there anything, though, that can be done to hold Musk and others in his position to account?
Yeah, I think we saw a little bit of pushback so far from the courts, from the federal courts in the U.S. in ways that have been, I think, reassuring to people who care about the rule of law. There's some ways in which Trump and his administration are still glad to defy the law, defy the courts, deport people in opposition to court orders. But so far, I think that in some ways, the federal courts can be a way of containing these people's power, including suing them for things that they do that impact the public. I think the real test will be in 2026, next year, when we have midterm elections in Congress. Everyone in the House is up for re-election. Do we have a normal election? And does the control of the House switch to the Democrats? That's when they can start issuing subpoenas. And that's when you'll see subpoenas and orders for some of these people, including Musk, I think, to come testify in front of Congress and tell them, what did you do? Where did the data go on all Americans? Is American data gathered via DOGE now powering your AI systems? Along with many, many other questions. And to me, that would be the beginning of more pushback, more political accountability and investigations.
And truly the beginning of a new chapter. Jacob, how can people listen to your podcast? And if there is one thing you'd like listeners to take away from it, what would it be?
Well, I for one thing, you can listen to it anywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube these days. And I would like people to take away that sometimes we don't necessarily care for these people or feel like someone like Musk is way too overexposed and dominant in our life, but for better or worse, we have to understand them and where they come from. And that's what I'm trying to do with my book and with this podcast, is understand it in a productive, useful way. Where did someone like this come from? Why do they have the beliefs and power that they do? And what does that mean for people who want to understand that or challenge that in some way?
Okay. Jacob Silverman, a pleasure to speak with you and really excited to listen. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was The Big Story. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or a family member. You can find us on Seeker or on all your favorite podcast players. You can rate, review, follow, and share. Also, send us feedback on this episode or any other by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Caryn Ceolin.